Hey, what a thrill to be with you once again for this next edition of Book by Book. I'm Richard Bewes, speaking to you from the Waterfall Studios here in Shepherd's Bush in London, England. And as we come to this next episode, I'm joined by Paul Blackham once again, but also by Sami Dagger, who comes from Beirut in the Lebanon, and he's our very special guest on the programme today. It's the book of Joshua that we're doing, and we come to study number 5, and this really lasts from end of chapter 10 in Joshua right through to the end of chapter 19. A lot of them are lists of names of places that they had to make sure that they'd secured properly. So name after name after name, which we need not bother ourselves with too much, though Billy Graham once said, I find these lists of names absolutely fascinating. So they are there to read. Paul, I think I'm going to start by reading, first of all, from chapter 11, if that's all right by you, Sami. And I'm going to read from verse 15 and 16. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took this entire land, the hill country, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills. The whole land, it seems, was now possessed. We're thinking about now the inheritance. And as we take this now to heart, I think I ought to start with, may I bring a question to you, Sami, if I may? And that is this. What help enabled those Israelites of old to take the battle and to win battle after battle and take the land?
Richard, the secret really is in verse 15. And it is written there that Joshua did everything as the Lord commanded Moses. And when we really do what the Lord has commanded, we have a trust and He will be with us all the time. I remember that the 3 Hebrew children, when they were asked to bow for the statue which Nebuchadnezzar has made, they have trusted in their God because they were doing all what God has commanded them. They did not defile themselves with the wine and the food of the king, and they were really holding the word of God up. And then when they were in a furnace fire, God saved them. And when a person does what God commands, God is there to help him no matter what is the situation. And this is why Joshua could win one battle after another, because the Lord was with him, because he has done all what's commanded from him.
And we know that this is all portraying, ultimately for us, the spiritual battle of good against evil and of God against Satan and over the whole empire of evil. I mean, you've been faced with evil yourself a good deal, and I think it's no secret to say that you've been in touch at one point with Saddam Hussein. I'd like to hear how that happened, because that was a question when you were a little bit up against it in those difficult days in Iraq when you were visiting there.
I have started the ministry in Iraq in 1990 when the first war stopped.
Yes.
And by the grace of God, we have helped the Iraqi people medicine, food, and everything that they needed at that time. And we have found favor in the eyes of the government, especially the Minister of Health.
Which is very good to hear. I know that you've rubbed shoulders with all sorts of these highly placed people in this world, and that you are aware, more than maybe any of us here sharing in the program, of some of the convulsions that go through the world when good is up against evil, and then when the servants of Christ are facing persecution and difficulty and hardship. So that maybe, Paul, as we switch to you, could I ask that in the light of Joshua, maybe chapter 11 again, but this time verse 23, how did these long wars bring rest when really there was so much more fighting actually in the end to be done?
I know it's strange when you read that very last part of chapter 11. Then the land had rest from war. And of course,
finished.
Yeah, it's all done. But actually, of course, the challenge is that they've got to go and still fight and take possession of their inheritance. And I think the key to understand that is the fact that the power of the enemy was broken in these wars, And then they had to do this mopping up fighting. And the parallel for us to understand it is the way the cross, by the cross, the power of the devil and all his angels is broken. You know, Christ reigns triumphant. But it doesn't mean there is no conflict.
No.
That the devil is still there and we still wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. But I love the phrase that you use, Richard, that we're fighting from the victory, not to the victory. So the victory's won and we're fighting in the aftermath of that, just as it was in the book of Joshua.
Yeah, that's such an encouragement. We fight from the platform of victory already secured. That's very important for the believer today. Here, as we move on to chapter 12, Sammy, we're seeing here the recording of the Lord's victories so that the people would fully appreciate all his wonderful works. How does the believer do that today? To record the Lord's victories and, in that sense, keep track of what he's been doing?
Well, it's really very vital for a believer to write down all his walk with the Lord and all the battles that the Lord has given him victory in it. And many times we believers, we forget what God has done for us. But to be able to recall what God has done, we have to write it down. And when we are in trouble, we have to remind ourselves that the Lord gave me victory here and why he wouldn't give me victory in this battle as well. So this is my story. Whenever I face problems, whenever I face persecution, whenever I face danger, I remember that God saved me in the past from persecution and from danger. Why shouldn't he save me now? So I trust in him, and this is the way to victory.
Yeah. Paul, would you chime in with that a little bit?
I do. I love this, like paying attention to sometimes you keep a prayer diary and say, like, I prayed for that. That is how the Lord answered it. So you can keep a record like that. And also I like reading things like stories of revivals that are happening today or recently. And it makes me think when I look at a situation and I think, oh, look at the society we're living in, people, so hard-hearted. Then I read an account where the Spirit just broke people's hearts and opened their eyes to Jesus, no matter how hard-hearted they were. And it makes me think, no, that's true. We can trust him. He can do this. He can do that right now, here and now, wherever we are.
I find that. I mean, I was born in a revival in East Africa, the East African revival, and people like, Heshbon Mwangi, Erika Sabiti, some of these leaders in the revival, they treated themselves as just children, actually, in the sight of the Lord, but they showed us younger ones how to live in the power of the cross of Calvary and asking for the victories of the Spirit to be in our lives and the power of the Word of God. So later on, when you find yourself in difficulties, you think, what did they do? Yeah, that's how they learnt it. They learnt these lessons. And we can do the same, learning back, looking backwards a bit. Let's move on, because I noticed, Paul, that the land is so often called an inheritance, which is really the theme of this. I mean, the term is used 42 times. Yeah. So what are we talking about here?
Well, it's so important. It's called an inheritance that is given from the Lord. You know, he constantly says, there's Jericho, I've given it to you. Here's the land that I'm giving you, all the time as an inheritance. So in other words, it isn't described as like conquered territory that they have done. Because it's not the whole book is not a testimony to the military skill of Joshua and his soldiers. His name, the Lord saves. The whole book is a testimony to grace, free gift of the promised land to them. And often in the Bible, it's called, the land belongs to the Lord. And he lends it to them almost in that way. But it's an inheritance because we don't earn an inheritance. It comes upon us freely. And it's so important to remember that all the way through.
It is. And, when you think about the Bible, we're not just reading history. It's really interpretive history. Yeah. So otherwise you'd look back at the Egyptians leaving Egypt at the time of the oppression and you say, well, it was a bricklayer's strike. No. This is God working in redemption for Israel and ultimately for the world. And that's how we're meant to read very carefully, seeing how God is at work in all of these things. Sammy, Caleb puts all the other Israelites to shame once we get into chapter 14. I think it's a throwback to Numbers chapter 13, when you think of the spies who had to spy out the land of Canaan. Because then 40 years later, we find that Caleb is now an old man, 85 years of age. And as he is, he wants to fight the strongest enemy. What does he teach us here? I mean, we're looking at what? Numbers 4, the chapter 14, it's around verse 9 and all around there.
And there's also the reference in Numbers 14, verse 9. Do you remember when he was like, they were all intimidated, even when he was 40 years earlier, and the Israelites were intimidated, and he was like, no, don't worry, we can easily beat them because the Lord is with us. But it's now like 40 years on, and he's 85.
Yeah.
Well, age really does not work its way here to discourage the believers.
No.
Caleb has confidence in his God. He experienced God when he was young, and he trusted in him to the giants that he have seen to get victory over them. And now he is 85, and all the people of Israel at that time, they were resting. And here he is, he said, give me that mountain and I'll go and fight. And because he knew that God is with him, and he been promised, he said, Moses promised me that he will give me this mountain. And this is the beauty when we claim the promises of God, and when we have confidence in our God, we put other people in shame.
Yeah, so there it is in verse 12. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. Or as he puts it in the King James Version, give me this mountain.
I was going to say that in Arabic it said, give me this mountain.
That's in your Arabic
in
Bible.
my
there.
Arabic Bible.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it very much. We might just come back to that in a moment or two. Well, yeah. And then, Paul, what is the difference between Caleb and the tribe of Manasseh? Because there seems to be something here in it's actually chapter 17, verses 12 to 13. Something about blessing through service.
You know, it's fantastic because the tribes of Manasseh, they complain because they say, look, we are very strong, there are loads of us, the Lord's blessed us a lot, we deserve more land. So Joshua calls their bluff and he says, that's true, you are very strong, very numerous, so you can go and have all that extra land that the giants live in. And they're like, oh no, we're scared of those, we don't want to do that. And you just think, oh, there's Caleb, he's an old man, and he's like, no problem, the Lord's on my side, I'm going to go and take it. And then here's this huge tribe, young men, full of strength, and they're scared. They won't do it. So it's like there's that wonderful contrast that they trust in their own strength and are therefore afraid. Caleb trusts in the Lord and he isn't afraid.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful lesson.
And he's wanting the hard bit. I mean, it's Hebron, isn't it, Sammy? That area?
Hebron.
Give me this hill country of Hebron. Hebron's always a tough area.
It is.
Yeah.
Maybe what we learn from this is that we learn from the people of experience. Often we look up to them and say, you're still young in spirit. Caleb was still young in spirit and not afraid to take on the hill country where, well, the Anakim had lived there, these great people and the terrifying people. So that as we round off, I want to maybe we make this our motto for today. It's a prayer, really. Give me this mountain. What is the mountain? What is it for you? There's something in front that you could be doing, something that you've been asked to do. And maybe we shrink from these things a little bit. Then the other part of us says, oh, no, give me this mountain. Give it to me, and I will use it for you. The opportunities ahead. And maybe they're sky high. Maybe they look quite impossible. Oh, no, they're possible. If we're doing it in the strength of our God as he goes with us and in the power of his word and his spirit. May God bless us as we do that.